Am I on? I am on. Thank you. Okay, good morning. I have a whole new respect for Becky getting up here every Sunday. I'm just going to dive right into it because this could go, I don't think it'll go long, but it could, so just get right into it.
Take all the time you want.
Coming from the longest-winded person in the room. Okay, so I struggled trying to pick out a good name for my message today, and while it's surely fitting to call it a journey and a testimony, it didn't seem fitting enough. I Googled synonyms for journey since this is my life and it spans many years, and I wanted something more fun. So I settled on Odyssey. By definition, an odyssey is a long series of wanderings or adventures, especially when filled with notable experiences, hardships, etc. Well, that sounded fun to me, so here we are. My Faith Odyssey. I remember as a small girl, maybe 6 years old, having a huge fear of our basement. It was a finished basement, and it wasn't really all that scary, but I feared it, and especially in the dark. My parents had their bedroom in the basement, so in the middle of the night, if I needed to go get them or tell them something, I was terrified. One night in particular, I remember laying in bed trying to talk myself into going down to tell my parents I didn't feel good. All of a sudden, I heard this really soothing voice, and it told me, "Do not be afraid." Now, I was only 6 years old, and I wasn't afraid of the voice. I was too young to determine if I was crazy or not, so I listened to the voice. I walked down to our completely dark basement. I sat on the floor, and I said, "If there are any monsters in here, come get me right now, because I'm not afraid of you." And nothing happened. I felt so good and proud of myself that I forgot I didn't even feel good. I went back to bed. I felt safe in that voice, and I listened to it often, but that first time was a big deal, and I remember it vividly. I was not raised in church. I still talked with God often. My dad and I would watch Hawkeye basketball. When it would get late, my mom would make me go to bed, and my dad would come in and turn on a radio so that I could listen to the game. And in all fairness, the Iowa Hawkeyes can take a lot of credit for teaching me it's okay to pray often, darn near every basketball and football game. I've always felt God's presence around me. I remember a time in middle school when I was really sick and I had horrible body aches, couldn't sleep. I prayed to God to help me feel better. I was laying in my parents' bed, actually, wrapped in blankets and lethargic. I felt this amazing warmth all around me, like a hug from heaven. I immediately fell asleep, and I don't know that I've ever rested that well since. Fast forward to high school. This was a long period of not listening to God or my parents. At 17, I got pregnant, and though it was not ideal, I had a really calming feeling about the pregnancy. I was partying a lot prior to getting pregnant, doing things I know I shouldn't, but did anyway. I needed to calm down, and pregnancy did just that. I attended all my prenatal appointments, and aside from the first 4 months, the pregnancy was uneventful. Brady was overdue, and they induced me the morning of June 5th. Labor was rough, very painful, and after 14 hours, the baby wasn't tolerating like he should, so they took me for my C-section, and that was traumatizing. I could feel them cutting into me because my epidural was wearing off. They had to put me to sleep. When I woke up, I was alone in the room, and I was really groggy. A man in pink came in. I couldn't even make out his face. He said, "Your son is very sick. We aren't sure why. I will send a nurse for you." All I replied was, "It's a boy?" I had a huge smile on my face. I didn't find out the sex on purpose, so I was really happy. Gift number 1 to distract me. Brady was born with a diaphragmatic hernia. His intestines, spleen, and stomach were up in his left lung cavity. They were not sure how long it had been this way, so there was no way to know for sure what he had for long on that one side. They told us worst case scenario at every turn, and God was with me when he was born. From the moment the doctors told me he was sick, my mind was 100% convinced he was going to be fine. When they wheeled him into my room early on the morning of the 6th, before taking him to the university, I put my hand in the incubator and he grabbed my finger and looked at me. I knew at that moment the fight inside this kid was beyond my comprehension. Even at the university when things were looking grim, I never had a dark thought enter my mind that I could lose my son. I had this insane confidence that could best be explained by the Footprints in the Sand poem. The poem that goes, a man dreams of walking on the beach with the Lord, and in the sky are his life scenes, and he sees 2 sets of footprints most of the time for those scenes, and then in some of the lowest and saddest times, there's only one, and he's like, God, why would you abandon me in those times? And God says, I did not. I carried you. That's what he did for me in that time. He allowed me to fully rest in my faith in him to heal my child. And at this time, I still had never been inside of a church. Brady was my miracle, done for me for no other reason than because God's will be done. Even after this amazing life event, I still did not seek out a church. A young single mother was something I felt very judged for. I didn't want to be judged. I didn't want to feel like a choice I made somehow made me less than. I felt like that was all church was. A bunch of people who think so highly of themselves they judge others to simply not have to look at their own faults. However, finding this church, Christ Community, was another divine gift to me. Eric and I started coming here when my dad moved back from Ankeny. He and Ann may have brought us here, but it's the people in this room that have kept us here. I finally found a place where I didn't feel out of place. So many people in this room that I care about. In this place, I found a church family. I found a path to Emmaus. Now, if you haven't heard of or attended an Emmaus walk, please see me after church. It's one of the most unforgettable experiences I've ever had. All of the things I've told you about so far were things that exponentially increased my faith and love for an amazing God, but none of them compared to the 3 days at Emmaus. That weekend changed my whole soul. That sounds super silly, but it's the truth. Now, without giving away the beauty that is Emmaus, which is a 72-hour retreat for adults, I will say on Saturday night of that weekend, you have an intimate gathering in their sanctuary. During this time, you are to lay your burdens at the Lord's feet. You try to forgive yourself and others by the grace of God's mercy. I was sitting in a chair in an aisle seat, and there was a table up at the front with a picture of Jesus on it, and there was a big cloth over the table. It was really hot in the room, so they had fans going, so it was blowing the tablecloth up so you could see up under the table. And it reminded me of the forts that we used to make as children, when you pull all the blankets out and you sit underneath. Anyway, I was just staring at it for what seemed like a really long time. And then I heard that voice again, and it said, "Come to me, child." He set that whole scene so that I would see myself like he did, still his child. And though I had made some really big mistakes and hurt people I truly loved, the Lord was beckoning me to give it all up to him and move on from my past and forgive myself. So I walked up to the front, knelt down on the kneeler, and I let it all out. I sobbed so hard I couldn't breathe. Then an angel named Cheryl came over and began rubbing my back and whispering the sweetest words to me. I never properly got to thank her for that day and the comfort that she gave. It's amazing how a total stranger can connect to your soul in an act of pure love. A couple years ago, Cheryl took her own life. I think about her often, and I wish I would have reached out to her. She was just such a beautiful soul, and she completely changed me. The same weekend, I made a very bold choice. At the end of the last day, they have a table leader or assistant table leader stand up and tell you what you will be doing at closing of the weekend. The assistant table leader at my table decided to give up and give instruction, and she hadn't barely spoken the entire weekend we were there. She told us what we were to say, and that at the end we are invited to say what changes we were willing to make in our life going forward. And she said, "For me, I will be quitting drinking. I think I have a problem and my family deserves more from me." I sat there completely breathless. I felt like she knew, like God let her look into my soul. I had not spoken about my mother being an alcoholic, nor I having a serious problem with alcohol. Her statement lit a fire in me. So at closing, I got up and said my speech, and at the very end, in front of my dad and my husband, I said, "I will no longer drink alcohol." And in my heart, I meant it. In my head, I was saying, "Yeah, right." I liked going out with my girlfriends for drinks. Unfortunately, I made poor decisions when I drank, decisions that hurt the people I love, and I drank at home too. I would have a glass filled and waiting by the time my last daycare kid would leave. I would sit downstairs by myself and get loaded and watch bad reality TV. I would wait for everyone to go to bed and go upstairs to get myself ready for bed. I distanced myself from my children, my husband, my family. The worst part was I had really strong feelings towards my mom for her drinking, which started when I was in elementary school, and yet here I was subjecting my own children to it. I was angry with myself. When I turned home from that weekend, I became very ill. I ended up with pneumonia, and it required 2 rounds of high-dose Levaquin and steroids over a course of 3 weeks. Some people say it takes 3 weeks to break a habit. I still thank the Lord for those 21 days of illness, another gift I certainly didn't deserve. About 5 months into my sobriety, Eric and I got into a huge fight. I went to my car and drove away from the house, fully intending on going to a bar. My mind was traveling a mile a minute, trying to concoct all the ways to justify a drink and how it would be all Eric's fault. I drove and drove until I found myself in a church parking lot. I broke down crying. Okay, I get it. I hear you. I spoke the words loud and angry. Without saying much of anything, the Lord guided me right back to him. He made me see if I drank, it was only ever going to be my fault, no one else's. And I needed him that day, but I did not seek him. Yet he sure chased after me. He spent so much time leaving the 99 to come and pursue me. That kind of love had me feeling really confident in my faith and my life choices moving forward. I will be 5 years sober on April 1st of this year. Now, I still fall daily. I'm not the best listener, you can ask my husband, but I try really hard to make strides forward. I always want to improve myself in a way that inspires others to seek what I have found. The real reason I decided to write this was because I'm a very flawed person. I have made big mistakes that should have cost me a whole lot more than they did. If you all knew the half of it, you wouldn't like me very much. I didn't for a long time. And God has a real funny way of letting you know when he's disappointed in you, and it feels worse than when he's angry with you. My dad has that same ability. I've worked really hard on myself over the last 5 years, and I have grown leaps and bounds. With that said, there is still so much I need to do better. There's so much growth to be had, and this church and the amazing people in it have been a beacon of hope. And of course, this would be the spot where I would lose my place. A friendly reminder, an array of heavenly light in my life for Christ. And that's what a church family should be. We may not agree on everything, and that's okay. Christ made us all different for a reason. Those reasons are to learn to compromise, learn to appreciate differences, and to love those we might not even like or understand. Getting up here in front of you is not easy for me. I kind of loathe public speaking. I wrote this out 3 weeks ago because I wanted to better define and understand my own testimony so that I could share it. Plus, Becky was all, get out of your comfort zones. So, cue God's intervention, because my thought was maybe next year I could have this testimony down enough to share it. Yet here we are 3 weeks later, 21 days. He loves to play the numbers. I figure if even one person gets something out of my ramblings, then these sweaty hands, crackling voice, and red face are all worth it. Comfort zones are really nice, but I gotta tell you, the view from this uncomfortable moment is looking brighter and brighter. Thanks.